Stormwater Study Group. We are not live streaming tonight due to technical difficulties with our vendor, but we are recording. And the recording will be posted tomorrow on the town website. So for people that couldn't come in person but wanted to participate, you will be able to listen in tomorrow. But unfortunately, we've been having some problems with our recordings, our beaming system. So it's not being beamed live to Facebook right now, which it normally would be, but it just hasn't been working lately. So, and we have been in touch with the vendor to get that figured out. So, all right, well, welcome everybody to the Manlius Stormwater Study Group. I'm pleased to welcome all of you again. And perhaps we could just do a quick go around to introduce ourselves to Jessica Eckerlin, who is our guest speaker. And I will go with, let's see, on my screen clockwise. So the first person is Don Gates.
Hi, my name is Don Gates. I'm a Village of Manlius resident and also sitting on the.
And Don, your sound is not very good, so you might want to take.
Oh, can you hear me?
It's very difficult to understand you.
Is this better now?
That's much better.
Okay, so my name is Don Gates. I don't know if you could hear me before. I'm a Village of Manlius resident. And I'm also on the, in addition to this committee, I'm also on the steering committee for the Town of Manlius Comprehensive Plan.
Okay, and George Lorifus. You're muted.
Resident of on Whetstone Road in Manlius, and I've got involved with this. I've been flooded a couple of times. So I'm interested in working with the group to see if we can correct things in the town.
William Nicholson.
Hi, Jessica. I'm one of the town councilors in the town of Manlius, but I also live on one of our beautiful waterways, the west branch of Limestone Creek, and I've flooded a few times. And so I have an abiding interest in the subject for both of those reasons.
Gary Nichols.
Yes, good evening. I live along Crane Brook, which overtops every 3 to 5 years. And that's off Sugarland Drive, which is off Enders Road.
And Mayor Worrell.
Mayor Paul Worrell for the Village of Manlius.
And Rob.
Oh, I can't follow Paul Worrell. Rob Cushing, Highway Superintendent.
All righty. So thank you very much. And Jessica, if you want to say a couple words about yourself and start up your slide deck, you're welcome to.
Sure, absolutely. So as Sarah mentioned, I am Jessica Eckerlin. I'm a graduate of Syracuse University at the Maxwell School and SUNY ESF in the Water and Wetland program and dual masters. However, I am not a stormwater expert. As I mentioned, I will explain the work that we do at the Environmental Finance Center, and I've also conducted some preliminary research on stormwater resources that I believe will help your group. So that's what I'll be presenting on tonight.
Thank you.
All right, is this working for everyone? You can see my PowerPoint.
So far, so good here.
Yeah,
All
it looks good.
So as I just mentioned, I'll give you a brief overview of the Environmental Finance Center. We're a really unique institution housed at Syracuse University. And then I'll just cover a few of our recent projects and pertinent deliverables that I think will interest the group. And then, as I mentioned, I just did some preliminary research on the stormwater resources that I think will also pertain. And then I'm really hoping to open this up to discussion. I was able to have a quick conversation with Sarah of the sort of research needs of this group, but I'm really interested in finding out additional ways that the EFC can help this group. So the Environmental Finance Center network, we are comprised of 10 centers that are housed within each of the EPA regions around the country. They're all made up of a state federal partnership with EPA funding and housed at an academic institution. The centers I work most closely with are in California, New Mexico, Maryland, North Carolina, and Maine. So we're spread out all across the country. And as you can imagine, with so many individuals working together, we have an incredible breadth of expertise. So it's just an incredible resource that we can provide to communities that if I don't have the answer, I can certainly find someone who does. Here in Syracuse, we focus mostly on resiliency planning. We've had some recent projects up on Lake Ontario working on their flooding issues up there and helping them with some resiliency planning in regards to climate change. I'm on the water team, but also housed at Syracuse University is a sustainable materials management team. And they do everything from composting workshops to working with manufacturers to alter the types of plastics they use in their products. So it makes it more easily recycled. We also do watershed and materials management work. We do a lot with green infrastructure. We work with the Water Resources Institute at Cornell University on rural water and ditch management. The crux of my work personally is within environmental infrastructure training and education. So at my center, we're very fortunate that we have received several grants, one through the USDA Rural Development Program, and also one through the EPA that allow us to provide direct technical assistance to communities. So we can receive a technical assistance request like we did at the town of Wolcott. And then we can partner with them to figure out what their needs are and how to meet those needs, whether it be drafting a comprehensive plan or identifying funding opportunities. I just wrapped a project in Louisiana, which was really interesting because they're struggling with essentially having governance silos, and most of their funding comes, as you can imagine, as post-disaster relief funds. So they get a huge sum of money after a terrible disaster, but they're not coordinating with other parishes or towns in the area. So we helped them develop a watershed management team, and then we helped them identify alternative funding resources so that they could have more of a continuous stream of funds rather than just these lump sums, which, as you can imagine, it can be difficult to prepare for receiving that kind of funding. Through our small systems project, we offer over 50 technical workshops and webinars every year. We do one in each state and territory. We do a ton of public outreach and engagement where we come into smaller towns, municipalities that aren't equipped to do that sort of work, and we offer assistance that way. We talked briefly about workforce development. This is a pretty new project that we're rolling out, which I'm very excited about. We just received a very large grant from the EPA to bolster this program. Essentially, we're acknowledging that there's in wastewater and water infrastructure industries that there's sort of an aging out population, and there's a lot of institutional knowledge that's being lost through succession. And also in state agencies, we're seeing it all over actually. And so we are instituting this training program to help those industries develop succession planning and essentially just better planning mechanisms. So we'll be rolling that out soon. And finally, we do a lot of stakeholder engagement and process facilitation. We are that neutral third party that can come in and facilitate a meeting or a workshop and help both sides present their information and keep that neutral dialogue possible. So that's an overview of some of the work that we do. These are two of our funding guides that we recently rolled out. We partner with a lot of state funding agencies, as I mentioned, USDA and CBGB and a couple other ones. And we, a couple years ago, heard they were expressing frustration that they weren't getting quality grant applications from municipalities, and they weren't able to allocate all of their funding because of inadequate grant applications. And then we interviewed some of the local towns that had applications rejected and found out that they were just really frustrated with the grant application process. So then we rolled out a series of funding roundtables across the state where we literally had a table that we had the funders on one side and municipal leaders on the opposite side, and the funders would present on their projects and the municipal leaders would ask questions. And from those funding roundtables, we developed this funding source guide that is a really easy document to look through and match your funding need to an appropriate grant opportunity. However, we've noticed in the post-pandemic world that state and institutional funding landscape has certainly shifted, and it's become a little bit more uncertain. So then we recently, as you can see, in December of 2021, developed this new federal funding guide. There are numerous funding opportunities that are either bolstered or have become available in the recent in the current administration. And we wanted to help municipalities identify those funding, those more secure streams of funding. So within this funding guide, the grant opportunities are broken into 4 main topics. We're looking at climate resilience, water resource management, renewable energy, and sustainable agriculture. And I can certainly make both of these funding guides available to you. This is a project I'm working on right now that I thought would really interest this group. So we're doing a capacity assessment for the town of Mansfield in Massachusetts. And the town of Mansfield came to us through one of those technical assistance requests that I mentioned, that you can just apply to an EFC and then you'll be matched with one of our centers that can help you. So the town of Mansfield is really interesting because they're relatively small, but they're embarking on a huge climate change resiliency initiative. And there is essentially one woman in the planning department who is in charge of all of that work. And she was really overwhelmed, and that's why she came to us to ask us to do a capacity assessment for the town. So we started this project by analyzing 4 of their major plans that they have written. And that was the open space plan, the stormwater management plan, their MVP report, and their comprehensive master plan. And from reviewing each of those plans, we pulled out 145 actions and strategies that directly address climate change resiliency work. So you can imagine why she initially felt very overwhelmed by this. And so we took those 145 actions and strategies and we broke them out across the responsible departments. We're like, all right, so who's actually in charge of all this work that they just said they were going to do? And obviously we acknowledge that multiple departments can be responsible for initiatives. There's a lot of crossover there. So as you can see in the bar graph in the bottom left, we broke it out across the conservation department, planning department, town board, select board, public works department, open space and recreation committee, and then the few that weren't assigned anywhere. So then we had an idea of exactly what they said they were going to do and who's supposed to be doing the work. So from there, we went and we interviewed individuals in each of those departments to figure out where the status of each of those actions. Was it complete, in progress, not started, or was it a red flag, meaning that no one is addressing that work? And we found that actually they're doing a really good job. 91% of their actions and strategies identified were on track. They were in progress. The 9% that are behind schedule were red flagged, and we developed this Smart Sheet, which is a Microsoft program. Not sure if you're familiar with it. Essentially a large interactive spreadsheet. And we were able to make notes of what the red flag was, what was holding up each action and initiative. And as you can imagine, we received incredibly positive feedback from the town of Mansfield on this project. The woman in the planning department felt validated that there was 145 new action items and tasks essentially thrown out there, and then that the town really was struggling with the capacity to meet all of the strategies and actions that they had identified. So this is just something to keep in mind as you move forward with your own comprehensive plan, that how do you keep an eye on the capacity of each of your planning and each of your town departments as you add more and more plans and actions and strategies. So I had a quick conversation with Sarah a few weeks ago when she introduced me to your group and the work that you're embarking on. And from that conversation, I took away that the two greatest needs at this time for your group is that you really wanted to know more about the current stormwater best management practices and the current research on stormwater practices, essentially who's doing the most current up-to-date research. So I did some preliminary research, and as I mentioned before, I am not a stormwater expert. However, we just signed the paperwork with the EPA yesterday. We received a multi-million-dollar stormwater grant. So we have developed a new stormwater working group within the EFCN. So I will be learning a lot about stormwater very quickly, as well as our entire group will be. And I'm sure this has come up in your meetings before, but essentially the end all be all for stormwater BMPs is the New York State Stormwater Design Manual. And within that, I would direct you to Chapter 5, the Green Infrastructure Chapter, because I think that has a lot of really easy to understand technology that you could implement to help stormwater or flooding issues within the town of Manlius. And I would also direct you to the Municipal Online Stormwater Training Center. And I've pulled out a page, their homepage here, and you can see that they have everything from financing to erosion and sediment control. It's a really easy to navigate tool. We use it a lot for trainings within our center. And I think that would be a great go-to guide for BMPs. In terms of current research on stormwater practices, I asked around, and I mentioned we work closely with the Water Resources Institute, which is housed at Cornell University. I looked through their website and I found two papers that I thought were pertinent to this group: The Light at the End of the Culvert and Culvert Assessment and Prioritization Project. You can see I included a list of their recent publications. And I should mention the last slide of my presentation has hyperlinks to all of the resources and web pages that I've mentioned tonight, if you wanted to peruse them yourself. And secondly, the ultimate for stormwater research, I have been told, is the University of New Hampshire Stormwater Center. And as you can see, they have a list of recent publications too. So I would direct you to those institutions in terms of who's doing the most current up-to-date research for stormwater practices. So that's just a quick idea of the resources that are out there. And as I mentioned tonight, I'd really like to hear some more from the group to figure out what else you're looking to learn. I wanted to mention too that this is great timing. This is a report that has just been released within the last month from the Water Environment Federation. And it's a fact sheet including 4 recommendations to improve the stormwater program in the US. And as you can see in the pie graph on the bottom right here, they're making the argument that stormwater has been chronically underfunded for the last 30 years. Only 1.8% of funding has been allocated to stormwater. So they're making a very strong argument to the federal government that they dramatically need to increase federal assistance that local communities and utilities require to protect surface water resources. And in this document, they're addressing long-term issues of funding, effective pollution control tools, environmental data to make good decisions, and also they're asking for a coordinated effort on pollution source control. So essentially, your work here is very timely in the larger political landscape. I just wanted to throw this out here because it's a resource that we use constantly in our network. The MSP Tool Guide, as you know, all of this work is multi-stakeholder partnerships. It all comes down to working together, especially when you're writing a comprehensive plan, just how to get people to come around the same table and to coalesce around visions and goals together. So I included a link to this document as well in my resource page, because it's just so helpful. We've used it many times. So that's what I had for you tonight. I just wanted to mention that I also live in the town of Manlius, and I usually work all around the country, and I am very, very excited to be working in my own backyard, and that I acknowledge that flooding is a huge issue. And as you can see, I included 2 photos of a huge flooding event last year that was just up the road from my house, and I've been flooded twice too. So I'm with you, I hear you, and I'm excited to work with you. So I'll open up to any questions.
You know where those pictures are?
Spruce Ridge.
It looks very familiar.
Yeah, I thought it would be. It's not news.
Some questions, dialogue, things that you want to ask Jessica about?
Or as I mentioned, even just research needs, like we need to know more about this, or because I can come back with you with those resources.
I have a question.
Mhm.
And I don't know if this may be just more for the general group or for the people who work with the town and village. No, is there like, like you see like the civil engineers will rate bridges, across the country, bridges that are in need of failure. Is there a rating system? Like, this is anecdotal, or like your pictures are evidence, but is there a way to inventory a town to grade its stormwater issues, problems, like saying, here in Spruce Ridge, that would be on a scale of 1 to 10, that's a 7, so that way you could prioritize how to address stormwater, the stormwater needs of the town. So is there an evaluative tool to do an assessment of, and I'm sure Rob knows exactly the hot spots, but is there a quantitative tool or some way to look at it quantitatively?
Jessica, I can tell you that I know I've worked with Cornell Local Roads. They are trying to come up with a process and how there's so many different things that you look at as far as with storm sizing of pipes and so many regulations and how the regulations have changed over the years. So I know David Orr, who's one of the lead engineers at Cornell Local Roads, they're trying to put some stuff together for the Highway Superintendents Association across the state to try and get a better way to not necessarily evaluate, but to, I guess, document when we do have these. Because I could tell you just from my experience in the town, it all depends on the event and where your heaviest rains, because sometimes you'll get it really hard in the north and sometimes you'll get it hard to the south, sometimes in between. I've seen areas where Manlius has not done anything and the village of Fayetteville has flooded. I've seen it vice versa. The north end of the town is flooded. I've seen the village of East Syracuse, which is our neighboring town, flood right out in the town of Manlius, not get anything. So, and there's times that our water obviously starts in the highest point up towards Casnovia, Fabius, Pompey, up in that area. So everything comes down through. So there's times that they've gotten flooded where we've had issues with our streams and creeks. In Will's backyard, for instance, it doesn't necessarily have to rain that hard in Manlius. And Paul could tell you the same thing, where we get some really heavy flows coming through those villages. So, it's not really a good, easy way to just say, okay, we could document certainly where these events happen, but to say that it's going to happen on every event and every rain event, it's just virtually impossible to tell that.
I'll add to that the project I mentioned on the shore of Lake Ontario, we worked with modelers both at Syracuse University and Cornell to try to model essentially flooding frequency. So essentially, can we tell you how often your house will flood within the next 10 to 20 years? And it was it was incredibly difficult. And you can imagine that stormwater has even more variables than that.
Yeah, so I think we have a combination of snow melt, you know, the rain that we get here, and then the rain that somebody else got upstream. And one event could be all three, and another event would only be one of those things. So it is very difficult to predict where exactly something would happen. But I think there are some trends, and I know, Don, you've talked about the little brook that comes out of Three Falls Woods. That does flood the neighborhood where it goes sometimes. And it's now causing erosion where it joins limestone. So that's one area where I think we kind of know something needs to be done, which is different from one that's just, so I guess I would say an overtopping brook, which Mr. Nichols will agree with too, is different from just a heavy thunderstorm. But a heavy thunderstorm can still cause flooding.
Yeah, and to Don's idea of rating, some rating, I guess I would add to that maybe the idea of, what other risks are there involved if there's an event in this area, like the one you're talking about now over here, there's implications on public infrastructure versus in other cases, it's just private property flooding or it's, private damages. I guess that would be worth considering when rating, I guess.
Yeah, they bring a lot of those variables into the fold, because you'll get some rain events that you'll get 2 inches of rain in approximately an hour's time, or 3 inches of rain in an hour's time. And an hour after that event is stopped, it's completely gone off of municipal infrastructure. Where, I've watched it over the years, it'll start in Manlius and 5 or 6 hours later, it'll be flooding on the north end of the town. So those are some of the things that I know that they're looking at and what the trends are when they do get certain rainfalls in certain areas. So I know that that's something at least the folks at Cornell are working on too, so.
So Jessica, I wonder if you have, you mentioned, I think it was Walcott and then the town in Massachusetts. I wonder if there are some examples of communities that have done that multi-stakeholder process where they were able to make, a real change in their strategy, or is it sort of too early for that work is sort of just beginning in communities?
The projects I've been directly involved in, it is too early, but I will certainly ask for some case studies for that.
Because I think, our goal here is the water knows no boundary. So we want to be sure we coordinate with the villages, the town of Pompey, the county, and just make sure that whatever we're doing, we're not kind of what that example you gave of the people getting hurricane relief. If you don't consider the whole watershed, you might not really be addressing the right solution.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Sarah? I'd like to back up what Don Gates said about quantifying quantifying the problems before going ahead with other measures. We've heard a lot from various agencies that can help in various ways. But it seems to me you need an engineering quantification first of the problem, and in order to present it to the agencies for further action and help. And I will drag everybody back to what I said when this group started. As an example that I can think of is the Falcon View Drainage District Drainage Study completed by Barton and LaJudas engineers in 2006 for the town. 1,800 acres on the hillside here encompassing 3 streams, and all the infrastructure was identified and its capacity quantified, and the estimates and models developed for how much water could possibly come through the infrastructure system. And in most cases, it was way over the capacity of the infrastructure. And that document has been sitting in the town offices and almost nothing has been done on it. So it would seem that you need to start with an engineering study like that one before you go to agencies. And perhaps I'm doing this backwards, I don't know.
No, I agree with that. I mean, you can't write a strong grant proposal if you don't have some delineation of exactly what is needed and how much it's going to cost to do it. So, and I think that's maybe, Paul, you can comment a little bit on the work that you're doing with FEMA, but I'm assuming that some of the stuff they're asking for is, well, how much and how often?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We've been working with FEMA now for the last 8 months. We meet with them at least 3 or 4 times a month, and those are not short meetings. And a lot of it is paperwork, 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 and paperwork. And they are willing to assist in a lot that we're trying to get done, but they don't look for a temporary fix. They're looking for a fix that's going to, no matter what the cost, is going to hopefully stand up for at least 50 years or maybe more. So, you know, they want to have to keep coming back every 5 years to repair a, you know, stormwater drain or a culvert or something like that. They want to be able to fix it so that it's fixed properly and it's done properly. And I'm very pleased with the work that we've done so far. I should say I'm very pleased with the work FEMA's done with us so far. They've been very, very helpful. Whatever the outcome is, it's not like we haven't put our time into it. And I think we're really going to fare well here, at least for the Village of Manlius. And so I talked to Sarah in length about it yesterday, and I'm going to talk to FEMA when we meet with them again Thursday to see in what way we can expand this into the town, because I believe that, as Sarah said earlier, you know, we can't control where a lot of this drainage comes from. If we could, you can bet your life I'd be sending out 10 dump truck loads of concrete to block it, but we can't. And so we've got to find a way to correct it. We can correct it in the village, but that doesn't mean it's going to correct it in the town. So we've got to do it. We got to do it right. So that's the bottom line is, because as it goes, my phone call in Manlius, when we have an incident, my next phone call is to Fayetteville, the mayor in Fayetteville. And his next phone call is to the mayor in Manoa and the town supervisor. And bottom line is, we have a golf course in Bridgeport, and I know where that water ends up. So, you know, so I can tell you that we can correct one problem, and we may cause more problems by correcting one if we don't do it right. So that's what we're trying to do right now. And FEMA has been very, very cooperative with us, far more than I ever could have expected. So, in fact, we were on the phone with them today, filling out more paperwork. So, and we've got a big meeting with them on Thursday. So I will
That's good
talk.
to know. Thank you for sharing.
Yep, I'll talk to them and see if they can involve everybody down the road here. So.
Other comments or suggestions or research that you would like Jessica to look into for us? Well, I'm very interested in your stormwater team that you're going to have at EFC. I think, you know, in a few months, that'll probably be up and running, and there may be other opportunities for us to engage with webinars or, you know, best practice kind of activities that would be of interest to us. You can tell, you know, this isn't going away. So we will be continuing to try to learn, even as the comprehensive plan itself gets written. You know, we still need to maintain alertness for where we can improve our stormwater infrastructure.
Sarah,
Mhm.
I did have, I wonder if Jessica knows if there's any, I don't know, like calculation or tools to for calculating, you know, the amount of water in a given area, and comparing it to what the ground can hold. I mean, is there some kind of resource that would do that if you look at an area to estimate how much water would run off at a given time?
Yes, I actually know a consultant who does that sort of work, and I will follow up and ask what information he needs to make those sort of calculations.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I think, we mentioned earlier that the more impervious surface, the more likely water is to run off versus to recharge into the soil. So some of the impervious surface in Manlius and the north end is natural. It's just solid rock. And then some of it is man-made, where we've added a lot more paving and buildings that have reduced the amount of soil that's easily available for rain to soak into. But I think you put those two things together in the north part of the town, and you have a lot of solid rock next to a lot of pavement and no dirt anywhere. You're just going to have runoff. And Gary Nichols is downhill from it. So. Okay, I do want to thank you very much for your time today, and also your sort of open invitation for us to keep in touch with EFC to continue our work on this. This is technically our last meeting of the Stormwater group, so I did want to take a few minutes to talk about what we want to do for our recommendations and our survey, which is our responsibility to get back to the Comprehensive Planning Steering Committee, of which we have Don as our member tonight, and Paul. So I sent it out in advance, and I hope people had a chance to look at it. Which would you like to start with, the survey or the recommendations?
Doesn't matter to me. Maybe the survey questions first. I would think maybe that would lead you to maybe some of the.
So based on input I got from actually the other study group, I wanted to have some more open-ended questions, but at the same time, I think it is sometimes, I thought we might be able to use this for a little bit of data collection. So the first question is just to sort of get what are people's concerns, which I thought would be important to start out with, and then there might be other follow-up from that. But then I wanted to kind of get some of this more measurable stuff, so we sort of knew who was doing the survey. If it were all people who flood almost every year, they would have a different opinion than people who never flooded. Then we went to some of these resources that we learned about in the earlier meetings around things that people could do to, I should probably put in, things like rain gardens and, different things that people could do that maybe they'd heard about or they had actually done. And then I wanted to get a sense of where in the town, which brooks or creeks they were closest to. So it's pretty, really, there's only a couple questions that are really significant. Most of this is more sort of demographics. So I wondered if people had other thoughts about more thoughtful type questions that we could add to this survey. Or is it okay the way it is?
I actually think it looks pretty good. Just one question. What if, would a person know what drainage district they're in?
Well, that's one of the, you're right. I should put a don't know here. It's on your tax bill, but most people don't read their tax bill that carefully.
Yeah, so they might not know.
And Sarah, I had a question. Who is going to receive this survey?
Well, when we get it done, it's not there yet. We're going to have them all on the town website, and we're going to be pushing out with social media and QR codes and stuff and asking people to do the surveys at various sort of social events over the summer.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Sarah, is the map going to be available?
The map of the districts?
Yeah.
That would make sense. So
Yeah.
I have a question about the drainage districts. I noticed that there were 3 consolidated drainage districts, but there are also a lot of smaller drainage districts outside the consolidated. And I'm wondering, how did these come into existence? Are they all taxed? Are all the residences taxed? Or how was the determination made? Is it equal for all of them? It looked like a big mystery to me and
It is a big mystery.
rather gerrymandered.
You were totally correct about that. What the drainage districts initially were all made, every development, every cul-de-sac, every developer, every builder has to make a drainage district. It was getting to where there were hundreds of them. That's when they decided to do the consolidation. Within each district, the price is the same, the tax is the same per household, but the districts between 1, 2, and 3 are charged a different amount. And there are houses that are not in a development who were, pre-existing homes that were built in the 20s or something that are not in the district because they didn't have a developer. So it is a mishmash.
The
There are a lot of
consolidated
that,
districts. What about all of the districts that are not part of the consolidated that are named?
Those would be and maybe Rob can help with this, but those might be developments that came in after consolidation and didn't choose to consolidate, or they came in before and didn't vote to consolidate. So there's a variety of ways that could happen. What happens if you don't consolidate is you never save up enough money to do anything major.
Right.
So you can clean your gutters, your culvert, but you can never afford to do anything else because the amount of money that you would have to raise is too great.
If you look at the districts, Gary, if you actually look at the districts and what they have done over the years, the south end of the town, which is the area in the manliest area, which back in the mid to 80s into the 90s was built the fastest, and it had more building, more infrastructure than anywhere else in the town. So that's drainage. Most of that is in Drainage District 3. So where a lot of your residential homes are, Fayetteville, parts of Fremont are in District 2, which there's quite a bit of infrastructure, not nowhere near as much as there is in the southern end of the town. And then you've got the older portions of the town, the north end and parts of Fremont, some of those areas outside of Fayetteville or just outside the villages of Fayetteville. There are older subdivisions, but really didn't have much for infrastructure when the subdivisions were originally built. So I think that's how they based a lot of those drainage districts on. Obviously, Drainage District 3 has the most infrastructure, but it also has the most homes involved in that district. And then it kind of did the same thing with District 2, and they did the same thing with the north end, which is District 1, which again has the least amount of infrastructure there. If that helps in any way, shape, or form.
So this is Mary O'Reilly, and I have another question. And I'm wondering, is there some way to align the drainage districts with watershed drainage to make it a more holistic approach to water management?
Well, essentially, that's what you have, Mary, right now. Again, you've got that District 3, where you have 3 brooks that actually meet at one time up in the village of Manlius, or up above the village of Manlius. You also have Limestone Creek coming down through. So you've got the largest area up there with the largest amount of residents that are in the districts, and probably the larger areas of subdivisions is up there. Fayetteville, you've got, like I said, you look towards Fayette Manor, Homewood, there's very little infrastructure in Fayette Manor. Homewood's got a little bit, not as much as it should have, probably for the time those homes were built in the 40s and 50s. So you kind of look at it the years when they were built. And that's how they, like I said, there's no real easy way to do it off of a watershed. Everything goes into the same watershed here in the town of Manlius. We all end up in the United Lake, and part of it goes to Onondaga Lake. So we only have the 2 watersheds.
Well, that's true, but you can break down the watersheds into smaller and smaller watersheds to manage water. And it just, yeah.
You could, and I'm sure there's several different ways of doing it. I guess what I was just saying is that's how they based it originally. I think when they changed it up, right, wrong, or indifferent. I think that's how when the subdivisions were built. I think that's how they did the drainage district.
But I'm just wondering if there's a better way to realign them to make it to facilitate doing what we want to do.
Sure.
Right.
So Mary, I think that's a good recommendation. It's not in here, but I jotted it down. That one of the things we are looking at is redesigning our water districts because they're not super intuitive. I would guess I would say there's a logic to them, but they're not very intuitive. And using the various brooks watershed as being the guiding principle would be a different way of looking at it versus looking at who the developer was or when the development happened. So I made a note that could be considered as another recommendation that we would give to the Comprehensive Planning Committee, which remember the comprehensive plan is long-term. So they might have 10 years to figure out how to do this fairly for the residents. So that might be a direction that we want to go in over the long run.
At the risk of becoming irritating, the Barton and Lejudas study did exactly that. The entire 1,800 acres was broken down into catchments and subcatchments, and the flows of each one into the drainages that come through here. It's not a mysterious process, it's engineering.
Okay, great, thank you. So so I wrote down, so we'll have, I'll just pop one here. And I'm not going to write up the whole thing because you don't want to watch me write on the screen, but I'm just going to see water districts so we don't forget about it. And then, so our overall goal, I think, from this whole series that we've been doing since winter was to work on environmental resiliency and just try to be better prepared for heavy storms, global warming, I don't know what's going to come next, forest fires, whatever it is that might be coming, for us to be able to, design our systems to try to have less damage and quicker recovery from whatever is going on. And I think we probably have some consensus about that one. And then the other one that I kept hearing, and the presenters and the study group members kept asking, we need money. These things are very expensive. So we need to have the town better positioned to effectively write grants and win them from FEMA or DISHES or EPA or whoever it is who's giving out money. So I thought one of the goals we could provide to the steering committee was we really need to be positioned to be more effective at drawing down large grants to take on these really complicated infrastructure projects. So I just added the third one about rethinking our water districts. So that would be something where we might look at, do we include some of the older homes that are not in the water district now? Do we realign the borders to kind of go more with the catchment areas and the watershed of the different brooks so that we're making things more logical in terms of where the water is coming from and going to? And then we had learned a lot of different sort of tips and tools during the course of the study. So I wanted to include a section that just had these resources of things that people can do at home, things that farmers can do, things that developers can do, and then things that the town can, or at towns or villages could do that would, sort of facilitate moving in this direction. So that was the organization I made. And so we now would have 4 recommendations. That's as far as I got. I don't know if there's other recommendations that come to your mind that you believe we really chatted about, but we didn't sort of write them down. And I would guess that there are a couple. So George, what would you like to say?
I think that last section on what municipalities can do. I'm on this thing with retention basins. You mentioned looking at them, but can we consider deepening or widening existing retention basins and or culverts? I don't know, in light of what's been going on, not just keep them clean, but we may have to go back and look at increasing their size if that's possible in the area, or their depth if we can't widen or widen them because of private property.
Sarah, that's right along the same lines as what Gary's saying here. We're talking about engineering at this point. You know, when you start doing those things.
Well,
And again,
engineering.
yeah, I mean, that's what I mean, George, but to do those things, you know, you and I, believe me, we're on the same page, but I guess what I'm saying is that somewhere along the line, I think you're going to have to do studies. You know, you're gonna have to determine what your sizes can be, and if you can, you know, something larger, that would fall underneath the municipal opportunities, but I think in order to pay for those, that's gonna be your big expense, or one of your biggest expenses, so you know, that's where the districts would come in hand with that.
Right, that's why the question I had on calculations with current rainfalls, would the engineers should have that information to know what size they need for the 100-year flood, the new 100-year
Well,
floods or whatever.
Yeah, and the 100-year flood now happens every 20 years, so.
Right.
For sure. And the thing that I'll add to that, and I guess what we know, that a lot of these subdivisions and a lot of these homes that were put in the town of Madison have been built back in the 40s, 50s, earlier than that, and even up and through the 80s and 90s when we had a lot of building. They were built for a specific 100-year floodplain at that time, and obviously we all realize that we're not, just like Gary had said earlier. The study that Bart and LaJudas did back in 2006, a lot of things have changed since then. So our flows are certainly way higher than they were then. So you know, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Of course, you want to be able to use that information, but I think in order to look for where we're going to be 10 years or 20 years down the road, that's what we need to do. We need to go back and look at what we've got to work with. And my personal view on it is we're going to have to find areas, and most of it is going to be the south, to where we can slow the water down coming down through the subdivisions. And a lot of it is private lands, and that's going to be a portion that the town is going to have to look at as a whole. And I think your engineers are going to have to look at what can we do and at what cost. You know, that's really the biggest thing. As far as making your infrastructure larger, certainly you can do that, but you have to do how that affects everyone else downstream. You know what I mean? So there's a lot to this. We could sit here and probably write recommendations all night long, and I think we've all, over the last 5 or 6 meetings that we've had, have got great ideas, and I think this is a great start. You know what I mean? As far as I'm concerned, it's way better than what I've seen in 28 years for the town. We're putting stuff down and we're giving recommendations, and I think following through with these, and certainly, having Jessica on board and having FEMA on board. We've never had this before, so this is huge for us.
So I'm gonna drop this and kind of go round with the time that we have left, and just ask each of you to kind of share a takeaway or a main point that you got from participating in this group, and how you want to make sure that that gets captured in the report that we give to the steering committee. So George, your hand is up. I don't know if it's still up or if you would like to say something different.
Okay, I'll take it down, but my comment was, I understand it's a complex problem, and it's going to take a lot of resources. I think we're seeing that to remedy any of the problems that we have. And I think the input we've gotten from all these other people, I think we have places to go for those resources to help us if we want to do this, who to go to which engineer, which another resource. So that's what I'm taking away. I think it's been good listening to all these folks, and it's given me appreciation for, it's more than just digging a ditch.
Yeah. Gary.
I would say that I got a better perspective on the town's problems as a whole, because I've only witnessed overtopping in this area. And it sounds like, even though we have a problem, so far there hasn't been much destruction to speak of, and no endangerment. I don't know whether the water that comes down from up the hill has a significant amount of lawn chemicals, agricultural chemicals, and animal waste in it. But I can see that other areas of the town have bigger problems than we have.
I love your comment about the pollution aspect, so I'm gonna make sure we get that rolled in. That's definitely part of the stormwater, the planning process, but we only talked about that at one session, and I think I want to make sure we emphasize that. Don?
Well, I think one is just a reminder, as Rob said, just how complex of a problem this is, that it can rain in one area and not another significant, and how two areas, very different rainfalls, one can be impacted by the other. So just understanding how complex of a problem. One of the things I'm wondering is if it would almost, because the problems being complex and the need for funding, does it make sense to have like almost like a standing citizen study group that would be looking at grants each year? Like what should they almost, so they would become a group that'd be quite good at writing these grants and identifying, because you can't do everything at once, but maybe that group could help just prioritize, and take survey information from people. And I think the other big piece is, I think there's going to be a huge and important is community outreach, getting people to realize the small things they can do, such as, saving the rain barrels, or just making sure you don't put your leaves in the street. I think people would appreciate that, right? So those that by the culvert don't get flooded. So I think just a study group, like how do you keep this learning going? I think we've learned a lot. And to help pursue grant opportunities, because these problems sound so complex.
Great. Thank you. Mary?
Thank you. Actually, I think this was very inspiring to see everyone come together here in Manlius. Many of these complex problems are being solved within the state already, and there are a lot of people that have participated in some of these activities. I like the idea of having a group that would apply for grants. I think we need to have an outreach to engage the rest of the community, because eventually they will be the ones paying for this. I think it's important to have engineering, good engineering. I was privileged to work with some hydrologists at DOT who do this all the time. So this is, it may be new to some of us, but it's not new to the group of people that do it all the time. But it's expensive to pay for engineering services. And it would be really nice to see if we could find some people in our own town who would be able to do some pro bono work. I think that would alleviate some of the cost.
Thank you. Paul?
I think just the one thing that I've learned from all this with FEMA is that documentation is very important. And, when you have an incident like a storm or something where you're worried about flooding and you're more worried about the citizen stuff, you don't always think about it. But I think our DPW supervisors, and Rob probably knows how important this is that you document, you take pictures and stuff, because that's what they want to see. The other thing is we have our village engineer sit in on every single conversation we have with FEMA. It's very important, and because they're the ones that are going to help make the changes. And so we make sure that our village, and it may be costly, but it's very important for us to make sure our engineer sits in on everything that's going on so that we do it right. So so the engineering part of it that we've talked about today, I think is very important.
Rob?
First of all, I spoke enough tonight, but I certainly wanted to just thank everyone who's been on the study group. In all the years that I've been involved with working for the highway department, I've seen several flood events. It's really good for me to see that people are actually trying to get together to make a difference. I've been doing this, like I said, a while, and you go from one event to the next event, and you do everything you can to try and help residents, and that's what been my job for the last 28 years. So it's great to see everyone involved. I hope that the same people stay involved, and hopefully these recommendations that we're making and some of the conversations we had will be able to move forward. So thank you.
Councillor Nicholson.
Well, I've done nothing but learn through this process. I have no environmental engineering background whatsoever. So this has been a hugely educational episode for me. And the biggest takeaway, of course, is just the complexity and the levels of interaction that are involved in all this. Of course, the overwhelming costs involved. The size and scope of these needs require such collaboration, and everything is multi-jurisdictional, multi-layer, and overlapping. And so I think the biggest takeaway for me personally is that it's now upon us to demonstrate competence as municipal government. That we are a competent partner with any funder. That anything that comes through for us, we can demonstrate that our community is serious about solving these problems long term. And I think this group has really been pretty fabulous for me. It's teasing out a lot of the minutia of what will go into actually doing that. So I'm just really grateful. And I also really strenuously agree with Mary and Don's kind of joint recommendation that a continuous citizen-led panel would be a great thing, because there are many brilliant people in our town who would be quite capable of helping in this regard, as evidenced by this group right here. So I couldn't agree more.
Thank you for that. Jessica, did you have anything else that you wanted to say? You're
I just
an
wanted-
member now.
To thank the group for this opportunity. I really enjoyed learning a lot more about the town of Manlius, and also just having that local experience. Two things. One, you've given me a great idea for our upcoming stormwater work. I want to figure out a way to have a peer-to-peer learning opportunity for your group. If I can connect you with similar communities that are going through this process, and you can just exchange ideas and talk about what worked and what didn't. So that's an idea I'll be bringing to my team as we kick off that grant. And then I also would just encourage you to keep cataloging these needs. A lot of your research needs, funding needs, education needs, outreach needs have come up, and just to create those lists. And I would be happy to work with you to meet those moving forward. But thank you again. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you. Well, I would like to reiterate the thanks that everybody has. And I think the MS4 process does include a community outreach component that the town has not done a huge amount of activity with, that I think we can use as our tool to, create some kind of a resident-led group who would do some community engagement and has some tools to do that. And that we would actually get points for having done that with our MS4 report. So I think there's a mechanism already in place to start this process. And then we can see, I think if we do ever get, when we do have an opportunity to write a grant, we could go back to that group and say, this is the grant we're looking at, this is what we're thinking about. And it would be and it wouldn't be a heavy lift. It would be, something a couple times a year just to design your engagement and outreach. So I will invite you guys to start with that. I'll work with our engineer to design some kind of an MS4 community outreach component, and we would actually work with the Stormwater Coalition on that. They might be able to provide a staff person to facilitate the group. So that would be I'm going to add that to another recommendation to do that based on this conversation. So thank you so much for doing that. Thank you, everybody who's participated, not only in tonight, but in all the previous stormwater study groups. This was a very educational process, and I want to thank everybody who was a member, all of our guest speakers, and all the people who helped with planning, because this was really a terrific opportunity for us all to learn together and hopefully to move the needle forward on addressing some of the stormwater issues that we have in our town. So thank you all very much, and have a wonderful evening.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for being such a
thanks,
great
everybody.
leader. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hope to see you soon. Bye.